Madam President, this past weekend, Americans gathered in Selma, Alabama. They did that to mark the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Many of us are old enough to remember when hundreds of brave men and women marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And there they were savagely beaten because they dared to stand up for the right to vote, a right that we in Vermont take as an inalienable right. And their blood and their sweat, their tears helped pave the way for the Voting Rights Act. They ultimately helped move our nation toward what's supposed to be a more peaceful, a more perfect union. And in commemorating the bravery of these soldiers for justice, we're reminded of what we can accomplish when we stand in principle and we come together, Republicans and Democrats, to do what is right. At a time when lawmakers seem far too polarized on the most important issues facing our nation, I was encouraged to see leaders from both political parties join President Obama and Congressman Lewis and so many others this weekend in Selma. President George W. Bush shared the stage with President Obama to honor the brave men and women who inspired the nation and helped bring about historic change. I was proud to work with President Bush on the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act, along with the Republican chairman of the House and Senate Judiciary Committee, Congressman Sensenbrenner, and Senator Specter. You could see them when President Bush signed the bill. You see Congressman Sensenbrenner standing there, late Senator Specter standing there. I was standing there with my camera as one of the people who helped put the bill through. President Bush had invited me to be there, and I took this photograph. I'm going to give this to President Bush because it is the only photograph where you can actually see his hand and the signature going down. That's because I was the only person with a camera standing behind President Bush. I don't say that to praise any photographic ability. I say that to praise President Bush for signing the bill. And then in response to the Supreme Court's Shelby County decision, a decision where 5 members of the Supreme Court decided they had a far better idea of it than virtually all House members and senators, I've been working with Congressman Sensenbrenner on bipartisan legislation that would restore the Voting Rights Act so that the president could sign a bill as President Bush did. Unfortunately, no Republican senator has yet stepped forward to join me in introducing this legislation here in the Senate. The Republican Party of 2006, along with their president, reached across the aisle to advance the cause of voting rights, saying they were not there for any particular party, they were there for all Americans. And I'm still hopeful that the Republican Senate of 2015 will continue the bipartisan tradition that President Bush and I and the Republican leaders did in 2006. Because the civil rights milestones we celebrate this month can't be just made as historical discussions to be talked about perhaps in a history class somewhere. The plain reality is that racial discrimination in voting still exists in this county. Chief Justice Roberts acknowledged that very fact in his opinion in Shelby, and he asked Congress to update the Voting Rights Act. Well, I wish they had not had the Shelby decision. I think it was wrong on many counts, but the majority in the Supreme Court voted that way. And now I agree with the Chief Justice. It's time for us here in the Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, to act. In his inspirational speech in Selma on Saturday, President Obama noted that 100 members of Congress had come to Selma to honor people who are willing to die for the right to vote. He then laid out a challenge to them. He said, if we want to honor this day, let the 100 go back to Washington and gather 400 more, and together pledge to make it their mission to restore the Voting Rights Act this year. And that's how we'll honor those people on this bridge, and I agree with them. We should come together, as this body has done so many times before, to restore the Voting Rights Act and reaffirm our steadfast commitment to equal protection under the law. And so today, in that same spirit, I would also urge all senators to come together to confirm Loretta Lynch to be our next Attorney General and the first African-American woman ever to hold this position. The delay of her confirmation is unprecedented. It's unwarranted. It should end. It's been 121 days since President Obama announced his intent to nominate Ms. Lynch. Her nomination was reported by the Judiciary Committee on a bipartisan basis. In the last 30 years, no Attorney General nominee has waited longer than Loretta Lynch to receive a floor vote after being reported from this committee. I think of what we did when President Bush was in the last 2 years of his presidency. Democrats had just taken back over the majority in the Senate. He nominated a person for Attorney General that actually is a person I voted against. But I moved that person forward because I felt the President of the United States deserved to have an Attorney General. I moved that person through in half the time that we've had to wait for Loretta Lynch. She has broad support from Democrats and Republicans across the legal and law enforcement communities. So there's no excuse. She shouldn't be treated differently than previous nominees. Actually, she should receive a vote tonight, along with the other nominees we're confirming. She should not be treated any differently than he was, President Bush's nominee. So in the wake of bipartisan inspirational celebration in Selma, let's come together to honor the difficult work of the Justice Department. Let's schedule a vote to confirm the first African-American woman to serve as Attorney General of the United States. Let us show the American people what we can do when we come together. Let us finally vote to confirm Loretta Lynch. I also ask consent. I see the majority leader on the floor. I don't want to take his time. I ask consent that my statement on 2 other nominees the Senate will consider tonight, Michelle Lee and Daniel Marty, be entered in the record, so I will not take more time.
Without objection.